Good evening and welcome to the Township of Woolwich Committee of the Whole meeting on Monday, December 5th, 2022. We are now live on YouTube. I will now do a roll call for council. I, Councillor Bryant, am present and chairing this meeting. Mayor Shantz?
Present.
Councillor Burgess?
Present.
Councillor Cadeau?
Present.
Councillor Grant?
Present.
Councillor Swint?
Present.
Resolution to reconvene in open session. That the council reconvenes in open session. Is there a mover and a seconder? Councillor Grant, seconded by Councillor Schwint. All in favor? And that would be carried. Land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge the land on which we live has been here from time immemorial, and that Indigenous people have lived here from time immemorial. I thank the neutral people, also called Attawandaron, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee people who have lived here and cared for this land and who continue to share and steward this land with us. May we together learn to care for each other, our flora and fauna, and the land that sustains us. Do I have any disclosures of pecuniary interests? Mayor Shantz?
Thank you. I want to let people know that I was absent on October 31st, but would have a pecuniary interest in item number 9.2, which is report DS-34-22. My husband is a consultant for Two Blind, who is the proponent in that one.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none. Items to come forward from closed session. We have none. Public meeting. The following portion of the meeting is for information only, and no decision will be made tonight. Any questions can be directed to Development Services staff following the meeting. I declare the planning public meeting to be open. This evening, we have Manager of Planning, Jeremy Vink, with us to provide council with an overview of his report. Mr. Vink.
Thank you, Ms. Chair and members of council. So this is zone change application 10/2022 for Riverworks LP for the property known as 1440 King Street North in St. Jacobs. They have submitted this to amend the zoning on the 1.5 hectare parcel. It is lands that are designated core area natural hazard in the township official plan. Parcel is currently developed with 3 commercial buildings on it and zoned core commercial C-1 with floodplain regulations as well as site-specific zoning. The site-specific zoning on the property actually outlines what uses are permitted on the property. And as part of that, that's the applicants making the request to amend that site-specific zoning to add the following 5 uses, being a commercial or trade school, a commercial entertainment or recreation facility, private club, the establishment of dispensing refreshments to the public, and a hairdresser, barber, or beautician. So those uses would be added to the uses permitted on the property, and they'd be permitted within the existing buildings that are on the site today. The applicant has submitted some additional background information that's available to the public online, being the planning justification report, functional servicing, and a property survey report. That's all that staff has for information to provide at this time. If there's any questions, staff can answer them. And the applicant is here, I think is here to speak to it tonight. I hope.
Thank you, Mr. Vink. Council, are there any questions for Mr. Vink about this report? Councillor Schwinn?
I received a couple of questions from the public on this one. I guess, first of all, would residential units be allowed on the upper stories of the building?
So through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Schwint. So no, those would be sensitive land uses in this case, and we're talking floodplain restrictions on the property. So because of the floodplain issues, we couldn't allow residential on the property.
Thank you. And the second question I received was St. Jacobs, I believe, has about 11 licensed establishments now. Do we have an overall plan on how many liquor licenses we may or may not want in downtown core?
Again, through you, Madam Chair, to the councillor. So zoning doesn't restrict the number of licensed facilities. It's whether uses are permitted in the zone itself. So we don't establish whether they're alcohol licensed or not. That is up to the, I guess, market. And that's basically free market, that we just allow the zoning that allows it in the general and the core areas or commercial areas. And then the market dictates how many they think can support within that area. So how many liquor licensed operations they could support. So similar to some stuff that we have in Elmira, where you sometimes see an influx of gas stations. It's up to the market to determine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Do we have any other questions, Councillor, Mayor Shantz?
Thank you. Through you to Mr. Bink. Do you know why there are site-specific uses on this and why it wasn't just a general zoning when it was originally set up?
And definitely through you, through the chair to Mayor Shantz. So in the 1980s, when the zoning was put in place, there was limitations on the sewage capacity in St. Jacobs at the time. So a number of uses that were potentially heavier water users and sewage users were restricted. So when you think of restaurants and beauticians where there's potentially a lot more water use, those uses were restricted at the time, and therein why weren't permitted at that time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from council? Councillor Cadeau?
Thank you. Through you to Jeremy. It says no comments from the public have been received to date. Have we checked in with the BIA? Because I know that this is kind of close by with them. Have they been engaged with this and how they feel?
I'd have to double check that whether the BIA was notified directly and verify with them, but I can still state that we have not had any comments from the public to this date. So, yeah.
Any other questions? Seeing none. We'll now hear from the consultant, Kevin Muir of Zayer Group, who's representing the applicant. Mr. Zayer, please turn on your video and microphone and begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Bryant and members of council, and good evening. My name is Kevin Muir. I'm the Director of Land Development with Zayer Group. Zayer Group is the applicant as well as the owner through Riverworks LP. The property was acquired in 2020, so we've had it for a few years now. Recently in May, we actually moved into the building, so we're new tenants and thrilled with downtown the Village Core St. Jacobs. Coffee shop and bakery may be a little too close, but all positives, I would say. What we have three, as Mr. Vink indicated, we have three buildings on the property. Virtually all the floor space is currently tenanted. We have one vacant space where we have a prospective hairdressing business interest in the property. Other than that, it's all leased up. So the purpose of the zoning bylaw amendment is one for that specific use, and then there's the additional 4 uses as spaces become vacant, and we look for new tenants. We're just looking essentially for some flexibility for different range of uses at that time. But currently there are no plans for new uses other than the hairdresser unit. There are no plans at this time or for development or redevelopment of the property. Essentially what you see right now is what you get for the time being. And there's no, we recognize these sort of limitations in terms of the floodplain constraints. Having said that, there's nothing, I don't think there's anything further to add. This is relatively straightforward given we're just trying to provide some flexibility down the road to tenant up the existing floor space that we have on the property.
Thank you. Is that it for you, Mr. Muir?
That's all for me, yes.
Thank you. Council, are there any questions for Mr. Muir? No, seeing none. Thank you. We will now hear from our registered participant, Susan Weber. Ms. Weber, please turn on your video and microphone and begin when you're ready.
I'm working, right?
Yes, thank you.
Hello? Oh, yeah, okay. Okay, so you said trade school, a rec center, private club, hairdresser, and there was a 5th one. I don't remember what it was. I guess I'm wondering if I'm not a quick thinker, so if it's okay if I just take a minute. If those particularly ones that were mentioned, if there have been like people who are interested, who've asked if do you think space is coming up, or like why like boom, 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 like why are those the ones that you anticipate there being interest in? Did that make sense?
Yes, I believe so.
And I guess since all the space is leased, are they anticipating spaces opening up? And as I say, why these 5 things? Just curious.
Okay, is that it for what you're presenting to council, Ms. Weber?
Well, I wanted, because I'm interested in what happens the north end of St. Jacobs, because that's where I live. And so when this came up, I just wanted to hear what was being said. And then if I had a question, then be allowed to ask it. That was all. So it's not, so maybe my question is my presentation.
Oh, okay, Chair, Clerk Smith?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, this is a public meeting, so residents are more than welcome to have any comments or ask questions. What we usually do is we take all those questions. Our planning department, Mr. Vink, will and his staff will put them together in a final report, and they'll try to answer all those questions in the report. But we don't always have the ability to answer questions on the spot during a planning public meeting.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So if then, you know, people, they want, I don't even know what the questions are. Is there public input if at some point down the road for what happens in, you know, not, it's, you know, it's their building, they can do what they want, but I'm just wondering about public input into what, you know, even for other things coming down the road.
Councillor or Mayor Shantz, did you want to step in?
I think Jeremy turned his camera on and he might be able to answer the question that Susan did articulate, but I can help out in a minute.
Thank you. Mr. Vink, did you want to step in?
Thank you, Madam Chair, just to kind of somewhat respond. So if there's future planning applications, they would be public. We would put them out in the paper and into the public again, and there would be similar public meetings. So whether it's another zoning amendment somewhere else in the area or an official plan amendment, et cetera, or the township going through some different official plan processes, there would be time for the public to give input and speak to it and give and provide their comments. I'm not going to speak for the applicant, but to some extent, but just to explain these uses, these are 5 uses that are currently permitted in other C1 zones, the standard uses that are kind of restricted on this property that are not impacted by a floodplain issue. So these are just other uses that are typically permitted in the C1 zone, and they were just going through the list to give flexibility to have them like any other property in a C1 zone would allow. The only thing that's not permitted are uses that are sensitive because of the floodplain. So there are some things still left off the list. Otherwise, it'd be a straight C1 zone like other properties in the downtown, for example.
Does that answer your question, Ms. Weber? Yes, okay.
Yep.
Okay, does council have any questions for Ms. Weber? Mayor Shantz?
Yeah, thanks. I don't really have a question, but Susan, if you have concerns with it that you think of later, you can always write them down and send them in too.
Okay, thanks. Yep.
Well, thank you, Ms. Weber. And I'm going to now ask the clerk if there are any unregistered participants for this meeting.
Through you, Chair Bryant, there are no unregistered participants at the meeting.
Thank you, Clerk Smith. Since there are no further speakers, I declare the planning public meeting to be closed. So we have no presentations, no delegations, no unfinished business, no consent items. Items pulled from the information package. I see none. Did anybody have anything they wanted pulled? No? Sorry.
Thank you, Chair Bryant, through you. There were items just the council would typically receive for information. With the latest amendment to your procedural bylaw that took effect at this meeting. So we had the changes take effect for the new term of council. There's no longer need to receive those for information. However, if council wants to pull any of those, we can talk about them. And then I'm also happy to discuss if there's any feedback on the new information package process. Happy to hear that from council.
Mayor Shantz?
I'd like to see if we want to keep those items out of the package because it becomes quite large. For me, when I was looking at it, I had to go back then into the emails to try to find those items. So it'd be nice if they were somehow connected to this e-scribe report.
Okay, so did we want any items pulled from this or just, no? Okay, we'll move forward then. Then we'll move into staff reports and memos. First one is the quarterly report, which is the Director of Finance Treasurer Richard Petherick, and he's with us this evening to provide council with an overview of this report. Mr. Petherick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So a couple of comments before I really get into the report. So this is council's first opportunity to see the quarterly report. And we would be bringing this report to council, and you will see this through the term of our council. And we do this basically from starting at the second quarter to the third. Or actually, I should say the first, the second, and the third, and then the fourth quarter is really talked about at a budget process perspective. So we use this report not only to give council some information and highlights about what's happening from the financial end of things, but also giving council some updates on how our business plans are going. I think from a third quarter perspective, typically you would see this within a November time period, but with the election and with no meetings other than the inaugural, which probably wouldn't have been a good time to bring this report, that's why it's before council in December. But on future years, you will see this much earlier than this. So I'm just going to go over some of the financial side of things, and then I'll open it up to council for questions. So looking at it, first from the operating perspective, out of the $11.87 million that we have as a net levy budget, we spent approximately just over $9 million to the end of September. This resulted in a negative variance of about 1.13%. That means that we spent, or we would have 23.87% remaining, and we should be at about 25%. And I think one of the things that should probably highlight to council as well, we don't really look at things from a strict quarter by quarter perspective, but we sort of look at it more from a January to the end of a quarter. In this particular case, we're looking from January to the end of September. So a couple of things to highlight for council in this report, looking specifically under development services and the billing division for Bill 124. So for council's information, Bill 124 was passed quite a number of years ago, and this was specifically dealing with the billing department, not the current Bill 124 that's out. But this one is what that bill did was it essentially said, at least from a financial end, that the billing department needs to be self-contained. So the expenditures that they incur and the revenue that they incur needs to be contained, and they're allowed to actually build up a reserve fund. So the billing department does have a reserve fund with which they can pull funds when their expenditures are higher than the revenue targets, or they can actually put money into the reserve fund at the end of the year if they're, I would say, if it's the reverse. So looking at it from the end of September, they're in a negative position of $161,000. So that means that their expenditures are higher than the revenue that they've taken in, which means if this were to end right now, we would be pulling $161,000 from their reserve fund. And the reserve fund is sufficient to accommodate that. Looking a little further in the report, I think I want to highlight, as the report says, in the infrastructure services, and this is really what is dealing with our current position, at least at the end of the third quarter, that being us in a negative position or a deficit, is because of the infrastructure services had a number of programs that were fully spent out, the surface treatment program, gravel program, and the dust suppressant. What you're going to see as they progress through the year, and we've even seen it as we've actually looked at our October statements, is you'll start to see that deficit start shifting. And the reason is because, as the report indicates, it is fully spent out. So it sort of appears as if you're kind of overspending when you're looking at it from a quarter-on-quarter basis. But as you progress through the rest of the year, it actually starts to even itself out, and that deficit will start to turn into more of a positive and a surplus position. But then again, if you start looking a little further down, it all depends on how you're looking at winter control. So I reported to previous councils that our winter control was going to be in a deficit position. So at the end of the third quarter, we are definitely in a deficit position. We've overspent that program area about $95,000. We've had snow so far this year. So that has actually gone further into a deficit. And depending on how we end up, I guess with a white Christmas or a green Christmas, is really going to kind of determine how we're actually going to get into the end of the year in that program area. And I think that will definitely play a part in our overall operating position at the end of 2022. So kind of looking at the water and wastewater budgets, from the wastewater perspective, at the end of the third quarter, we were sitting in a slight surplus position, about $65,000. At the end of the second quarter, we were actually in a deficit position, but if council can recall, it was a fairly dry summer. And with the I&I issues or the inflow and infiltration issues that we have both in St. Jacobs, Elmira and Breslau, when we have those dry parts of the season, we end up actually seeing that we can actually become in a bit of a surplus position. And that's because when we do our our estimates for what we think our regional billings are going to be, we kind of look at it from a 5-year average. So therefore we can kind of take in those rain events that may kind of fluctuate from, from pushing ourselves into a greater flow through the wastewater system or not. In this case, given the summer being fairly dry, there wasn't a lot of inflow that was happening. From the water side, I would say, unfortunately, we are in a deficit position about $482,000. So I did say to council in the second quarter that we were experiencing a deficit, and we were looking at some of the causes of why we were in a deficit. And one of the things I was looking at it, I didn't think it was more of a billing issue. I thought it was more of a potential leak type of an issue. And so what we did find is there was one large water user in the township, and we were doing estimates on them. And as we were going through the radio remote program, we recognized that remote wasn't reading to us. And so what we have to do for that is we have to go and we have to replace that water meter, but that hasn't been done yet. So we were doing some estimates. So we actually contacted the property owner and said, can you please actually send us a picture of your meter so we know what it is? And we found out we were estimating too low. So from that perspective, we were actually underbilling them. And so we've since have corrected that. And we will make sure that we have accurate billings as we go forward until that meter is replaced and we can start reading it remotely. The other one that we saw was unfortunately one of our own, and it was the significant cause of the deficit so far. We have an auto flusher down in the Breslau area near the airport, and it was stuck in the open position. Now, what that means is that water was continuously flowing through that. And when that happens, the water it's a water loss. And unfortunately that is something that, we kind of wish that we would have been able to see that. And of course we use water, the auto flushers, and specifically down in the area by the airport is because it's kind of almost like on a dead end system. And of course, if council has any more questions, Jarrett will probably be way better at explaining this than I will, but I will try my best. So when it's at a kind of like at a dead end system, what happens is we need to use auto flushers to be able to open it up and have that water flow through to make sure that we have proper water residuals that meet the provincial standards. But unfortunately, it was stuck open, and it was also in an area, because it was one of the questions that I asked of like, should we have not have seen that? But it's actually connected to our waste or our stormwater system. So as the water was flowing through the auto flusher, it was going right into the storm system. So we have since seen it. We've actually closed it. I know it will have to be replaced, but I do not know the timing on when that will be replaced. But since this is a spot that the water staff, the water operators go down and actually do their residual testings at, when they're down there doing their sampling, they will actually open it up and make sure the residual has a proper flow. And when they're finished, they'll close it. I think one of the other unfortunate sides of this, as council may have heard, we have been going through a water remote program. And when we are finally up and running on the program, all the radios have been installed, but the software side hasn't been done yet. We haven't actually got access to the platform. But one of the good things that we would have with the platform is if we would have unusual flows would happen, we'd get sent an alarm. And unfortunately, if we were on the platform, this definitely would have set off an alarm and we would have been able to see this well before this time. Hard to tell exactly when it started to be in a stock open position, but I can tell you that it has been a significant amount of time, which is why we are in a deficit position. But we can say that the issue has been corrected. So in essence, I can say that we've kind of stopped the water flowing from that, and hopefully we'll kind of get ourselves turned around a bit. But I can definitely say by the end of 2022, we for sure will be in a deficit position within this area. From a capital budget perspective, as you can see in the statements that are appended to this report, this is an opportunity where staff want to give council a highlight and an update of where the projects are and where they're going, and then whether there can be any carryovers or potential carryovers into 2023. So there are comments attached to that. And of course, staff are here to help answer any questions that council may have. So with that, Madam Mayor, I will stop there and take any questions that council may have.
Thank you, Mr. Patrick. Are there any questions from council for Mr. Patrick? Councillor Grant?
Through you, Chair, to Mr. Pepperidge. So I just wanted to ask, you mentioned there's no expected timeline for the repair. But one of the questions I had in regards to the water and wastewater was the leak in the system. Is it possible there's leaks in other places, and does staff believe the site located in the report is the only source of the leak or the primary source?
Yeah, for sure. Through you, Madam Mayor, I would say that there definitely would always be other leaks, definitely not to this magnitude. And the reason why I say there'd be other leaks is because no system is perfect. Systems could always be tightened up. There is always going to be leaks out there. And leaks do happen, but nothing to this magnitude. This is the first time I've ever seen something of this magnitude happen from a leak perspective, other than when we actually had a pretty big leak that happened, but thankfully it was on the region's transmission main coming into the Brazil area, and unfortunately that went undetected for a while because it was underneath the Grand River, and hence nobody really saw any water flowing. But there's nothing other from a big significance like this one that I've seen. But yes, leaks do happen because the systems aren't perfect.
And then a follow-up question just about the meters. How do we go about identifying faulty meters?
So through Madam Chair. So I think once again, when we, I guess when we're in the water program right now, we used to go and manually read our meters. And so that would mean we'd have staff go out, or we actually had an external contractor at the end. They would go out and they would go to the exterior of the building. There's something called a puck. And they would go basically put the meter reader to it. And if it wasn't reading, we get an error message. And they would sort of send that information back to us, and we'd fill out a work order to our water staff to go look at whether there's a faulty meter or whether there's something going on with the wiring. With the radio remote program, and as I said, when we're up and running on the platform, we're going to be able to actually detect that it won't be sending a read information, and we'll be getting a read information. I forget the frequency of it, but it's more than once daily. So we would be able to, in between our billings, we would be able to identify meters that are not working and be able to correct that fairly quickly once we're up and going on the platform.
Right, thank you.
Does council have any other questions? No, seeing none. Oh, Jared, did you have any comments?
No, through you, Chair Bryant. I think Richard answered all those comments. Just in specifically to this, it wasn't a faulty meter in this case. It was just a faulty remote read. We weren't able to get a reading, so from external. So that's where we had to go in. But the meter itself was performing. So it's rare that a meter actually malfunctions. It's more on the reading side.
Thank you. Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, now that Mr. Pipet's on the screen, I'll ask him another question. Look through the work plan, there's only one red X. I'm just curious on the rationale for postponing the wastewater sewer lining. Is that on for next year, or where are we at?
Okay, thank you, through you, Chair Bryant, to Councillor Schwint. The reason for the pause on the sewer lining program, because it's quite an effective program for us, was COVID, really, because it does require access to homes. So because of the pandemic, we had put a pause on that. But we do actually have, I don't want to tip our hand here, but we do have planned work for lining, which will be at council's subject to council approval in the upcoming budget year.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, seeing there's no more questions. So thank you, Mr. Petherick. This report is for information only, so there's no further action required on this report. So next on the agenda is the appointment of councillors to advisory committees. We have Deputy Clerk Lydia Samello to provide council with an overview of her report.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of committee. Before you is a report to appoint councillors to the various advisory committees. The recommendation is requesting 7 councillors in total. 2 committee appointments are optional, and that's for the GRAC, the Grand River Accessibility Advisory Committee, and WEAC, the Woolwich Environmental Advisory Committee. For WEAC, we have 7 members already from the public who are interested to sit on the committee, and we can keep it at 7, or we can add 1 more with a councillor appointment and amend their terms of reference. If more than 2 councillors volunteer for a specific committee, we can take it to a vote, or we can amend the committee's term of reference to include any additional councillors. For the Elmira BIA, we can amend the recommendation to stipulate that we will seek approval from the BIA to have an additional councillor, and staff is confident that the BIA is happy to have more council representation. So attached to the report are the committee mandates and information regarding the individual committees, along with the link found within the report that is directing council or members to the area of the Township website that is outlining further information on the committees. So at this point in time, I'll turn it to the chair to go through the recommendation and request councillors to volunteer for the individual committees.
Thank you. Council, are there any questions for Lydia? No, seeing none. Okay, well, the recommendation in this report is for us to appoint members to boards and committees. Can we move through the list, starting with the optional council appointments to GRAC? Does anybody want to put their name forward for GRAC? Kyla or Councillor Grant? Okay, so we've got that one. Now the next one is the RAC committee. Do we have someone willing to do the RAC committee? Councillor Schwint? Yes, okay. Sorry, Councillor Nadeau? Do we have anybody else do for that one? So what do we do when we have 2, Jeff? Do we have to go to a vote, or do we? Rock, paper, scissors?
Sorry, I'm just trying to turn my camera back on. You can either take a vote, or you can, I mean, one thing you could do is you could continue through the list and see if there's any other with double or more than 1 councillor who wants to sit on it. Maybe see if by the time we get to the end of the list, we go back.
Okay, we'll come back to RAC. The next one on the list is the Tweak Committee. Councillor Burgess? No one else? So we have a single member for that one. Oh, Nathan who? I'm sorry. Okay, but yeah, too many spaces. Okay, so we've got 2 for that one as well. Next one is the Heritage Committee. I will go for that one. No challengers. That's mine. Okay, next on the list is the WEAC Committee. Councillor Grant, anybody else? I'm going around the table. No, just one for the WEAC. The next is the BIA for St. Jacobs. That would be Councillor Schwint. Nobody else? No. And lastly is the Elmira BIA. Councillor Burgess, Councillor Nadeau. We have 3 of them that we have to go back through. Okay, let's start with RAC. Who wants RAC? Which 2 names did we have, Jeff?
Through you, Madam Chair, I have Councillor Schwint and Councillor Cadeau both volunteering for that committee.
Mayor Schatz?
So that committee meets 3 times a year. I've been chairing it and sort of co-chairing it with a council member. But I think that because it only meets 3 times a year, the 3 of us, if you've got an interest in it, we can work out, you know, what your interests are in terms of chairing it. It's a pretty high level committee, so I don't have a problem with 3. Do we need to change terms of reference in some way to do that?
Through you, Madam Chair, we may need to do that, and if you put both names forward, we'll look into that for you.
Thank you.
So is it safe to move on? Okay, the next one again is Tweak. We have the 2 members for Tweak, which were,
Councillor Burgess and Councillor Cadeau.
okay. How are we gonna decide this? Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, last term of council, Councillor Martin and Councillor Shantz often went to different committee meetings, both of them, and it wasn't a problem. I'm not sure we ever changed terms of reference for those, but.
Can I make a suggestion? Sorry, I'm kind of putting a wrench in things and throwing my hand up for everything, and I think that's kind of against the point here. So I can withdraw for that one. Now, I'm just mindful that Councillor Burgess, is it Burgess or Burgess? Burgess, sorry. You also had put your hand up for Elmira BIA. Now, is that something that we can modify the terms of reference for and have both Ward 1 councillors attend? I don't know who I'm asking that to. I'm just gonna throw it out there, and if anybody wants to answer, that would be great.
Sorry, who is?
So,
Olivia,
yeah,
sorry.
so as indicated, in speaking with staff, they had recommended that if both councillors from Ward 1 wanted to be part of the committee or the BIA, that they would change she would take it back to the BIA and they could change their terms of reference. And staff felt confident that the BIA would accept both councillors on the committee. So we could do it that way and have both attend and
Thanks.
Change the terms of reference.
Thank you. So Councillor Nadeau, then did you still want to, was it Tweak? Like that was the one.
No, it's Cadeau.
sorry.
It's okay. I just
Getting everybody.
messed up Evan, so I think we're all even now.
We'll get this straight yet. Okay. Have we got those sorted out, Jeff?
Yes, through you, if you'd like, I can repeat them.
Please do.
So I have Councillor Grant to the Grand River Accessibility Advisory Committee, Councillor Schwint and Cadeau to the Remediation Advisory Committee, Councillor Burgess to the Township of Woolwich Environmental Enhancement Committee, Councillor Bryant to the Woolwich Heritage Committee, Councillor Grant to the Woolwich Environmental Advisory Committee, Councillor Schwint to the St. Jacobs BIA, and both Councillors Burgess and Cadeau to the Elmira BIA.
Thank you. Okay, now that we have all the nominations, is there someone willing to move the recommendation as amended with the nominations? Mayor Shantz, do I have a seconder? Councillor Grant, all in favor? And that would be carried. Thank you. Okay, then we'll move on to the next one, which is the proposed 2023 council meeting schedule. Next, we have the council and committee facilitator Alex Smith with us to provide council with an overview of her report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, Madam Mayor, Madam Chair, and Council. Before you this evening is a report regarding your 2023 meeting schedule. I would like to highlight a few key points in my report for you this evening. First, staff are proposing that meetings switch to Tuesday nights in February 2023. A Tuesday evening schedule allows staff to process reports faster, complements new planning application approval timelines for Bill 109, requirements better, and allows staff to respond and report to council regarding sudden or urgent matters better. Historically, staff have refrained from scheduling meetings after long weekends. To mitigate Bill 109 requirements, staff have not avoided scheduling meetings after a long weekend in this schedule. That being said, I would like to point out that with the proposed schedule in 2023, meetings are scheduled after only 4 long weekends during the year. March break, a summer break in July, and a 2-week break over Christmas is also historically planned into the council meeting schedule. Bill 109 requirement timelines also impact extended breaks. March break will continue to be observed without a scheduled meeting. For the extended breaks in July and December, staff are proposing that special council planning meetings be scheduled. Should a planning application need to be brought to council to satisfy timeline requirements, an agenda will be created. In the event that nothing is scheduled for a special council planning meeting, it would be canceled. Staff are recommending that council adopt the schedule as proposed in the report. Once approved, a copy will be sent to Rogers TV to schedule 4 televised meetings in 2023. Following that scheduling, staff will bring forward a memo with an updated schedule showing the 4 televised dates. And with that, if council has any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Council, are there any questions for Ms. Smith? None? Okay, there's a recommendation in the report. Is there anyone who would like to move the recommendation? Councillor Cadeau, I'll get this right, yes. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Grant? Any further discussion? No? All those in favor? That would be carried. Next on the report is item 12.4, Municipal Election 2022 report. Now we have Clerk Smith with us to provide council with an overview of his report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With your permission, I'd just like to make a quick staffing announcement. Lydia, could you turn on your camera, or Ms. Smello, could you turn on your camera, please? So Lydia Smello has been with the township for just over a year. She helped immensely with the election preparations, and she has announced her retirement effective December 15th. So as of that date, she will no longer be with the township, but I do want to thank Lydia very much for all her hard work. And what I think and what this report, I believe, will show would be a successful election. So thank you to Lydia. The other announcement I'd like to make, and I'd like to ask Ms. Smith to turn on her video for just 1 second, please. So the incoming deputy clerk will be Alex Smith, starting today, actually. She'll be deputy clerk as soon as Lydia leaves. So thank you, Alex. Through you, Madam Chair, I'd just like to present a quick PowerPoint. I'm just going to pull it up on the screen here to just walk us through some of the charts that was in the report. I think it's just coming up now. And I need to remember how to change slides. Here we go. So this report has been provided to council for 2 reasons. One, to evaluate the 2022 municipal election, and the second is to report on accessibility initiatives and make the report public. I really like elections. You can probably tell that with the amount of detail I've given you in the evaluation part, which again is optional. But again, I like this stuff. So this is a chart I put up in the report. In terms of voter turnout, you can see we had a slight increase in voter turnout for 2022. I tried to list some possible reasons for that. I think one of the big ones, of course, is really strong races in all the contests. So I think that was a really good thing to see. I also wanted to say I think we sort of bucked a trend here. If you looked at other municipalities from the data that's been gathered so far, there was a slight decrease in voter turnout, and then a little bit bigger in the Ontario provincial election and the most recent federal election. So nice to see our numbers are a little higher. In terms of voter demographics, really similar numbers to 2018, the last year that we were able to provide those statistics for council. The 60 to 89 year range, of course, being the highest level of voter turnout. But again, it was really nice to see an increase in turnout in the 18 to 29-year-olds, the lowest range that I report on. I also put in the report, but MPAC no longer makes gender information available, so we won't be able to provide that information in the future. In terms of voting patterns, we had a very similar trend to last election. Where we had votes trickle in over the 10-day voting period up until I'd say the Sunday just before voting, when you started seeing votes go up.
And then again on October 24th, voting day, that was of course our busiest volume day. And that was the same that we found in the last election when we only did internet and phone. So pretty similar whether we offered paper or not. And then I also put a little earlier in my report that results were available at 10:52 p.m. The unofficial results a little later than we were hoping for, but it was again a really good voting day and good turnout. Of the people that voted, 72% or almost 73% voted by internet, almost 3% voted by phone, and just over 20% voted by mail, in-person paper ballots. We didn't offer mail-in ballots this election. Council chose the previous three voting methods. When we put out an a voting survey that was available online and at the voting places, you can see in the next column there that 94% preferred internet voting or asked for internet voting again for the next election. 22% were looking at phone voting, 45% for in-person ballots, and then a smaller portion for mail-in. So you can see sort of leading internet and in-person were sort of preferred. I do want council to take those results with a bit of a grain of salt because we had 97.5% of people who filled in the survey said they voted online. So that was a higher results than anything else for sure. It is hard to do those surveys to make it perfectly accurate, but it was nice to see at least a lot of people did fill in that survey, even if most were online voters. Of course, the other thing I mentioned in the report is that very few people indicated why they didn't vote. I had hoped that maybe some people might come on and tell us why, but very few people told us why they didn't vote in the election. Oops, we need to go back. Lastly, the accessibility report from the survey responses, we had a few people that said they did have accessibility issues. However, a lot of those really just indicated that they did have a disability, and many of them appreciated the ability to vote online. I also kind of mentioned that other feedback included larger fonts, spacing of PIN numbers, things like that could be accessibility issues. So although not specifically mentioned in accessibility, we want to think of those things going forward. The four comments that we did have specifically regarding accessibility were on the web content accessibility guidelines, making sure we match those, the distance of accessible parking spaces at the WMC, requests for transportation to voting locations, and it is nice to see that Qantas Transit can do that, and one request for a Braille ballot that we did provide the person an alternative voting method. So that's the end of my report. I just wanted to summarize that for council. And again, I'm happy for any feedback that council or the public may have from the election. Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments, Mayor Sons?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Jeff and your staff for all the work in the elections. It's a big deal. Comments that I've had back were all positive for the internet and the telephone too. I had a number of people really appreciate the telephone voting.
Councillor Grant?
Well, through you, Madam Chair, to Jeff, I will echo your response in saying I quite enjoy the election process, and reading through your report was quite enlightening. I did want to ask about whether or not staff feel there is value in offering phone voting in the future.
Sorry, through Chair Bryant to Councillor Grant. It's a really good question. It's one that I'm struggling with myself as well. If you look at the number of voters, we had 192 ballots that were cast by phone, so definitely not the highest voting number. There's a lot of time involved for staff to set up, test, verify that all those phone numbers work. We had a staff member record all of the councillors' last names so that it sounded local. We definitely have some issues with some local names being pronounced incorrectly, so we like to do that. I guess, so there is value to to telephone voting, but there's also a cost to it in terms of staff time, If a different voting provider had a separate cost for telephone voting, that would definitely be something we need to consider. So really a long-winded way of answering your question is not sure. I think we need to evaluate it for the next election. And it's definitely something in terms of the voting method that I would have to bring back to council before the 2026 municipal election that you can look at.
Thanks so much.
Councillor Cadeau.
Thank you, Chair Brian, through you. I'm wondering, and one of the comments that I've heard back from people is, you know what, I really didn't have a good sense on where to go to get information about the candidates. And now I suppose we can take a little bit of responsibility for that. And I apologize to the residents of Elmira, but I know that some other municipalities had taken a concerted effort to create space for candidates to, and it's consistent, right? So it's not, you know, cherry picked questions that people have to fill out, but it's just tell us about yourself. Is there an appetite or is there an avenue that we could explore, you know, having space on the Woolwich website for potential candidate profiles or something like that, just so people have a space where they can go and learn about the candidates?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. We as clerks, we do try to be really careful for this, because we want to make sure that we're not asking, you know, questions that might get certain people elected and others not. We want to make sure that we're not giving any additional benefit to some candidates and not others. What we did do this year is we sort of set out at the beginning of the election what contact information we could provide for every candidate, links to the website, links to social media, the settlement that they lived in, and a link to their website, and a phone number, I mean. And so that in that way we thought, well, at least if we get the candidate in contact information out, people can seek it out themselves. I definitely heard in the public feedback that we got a lot of people asking the very same question that you did. I think we could definitely take a look at it. But again, I think we want to be really careful that we're not advantaging any candidate or groups of candidates because we're doing this. I think there's other things that we can do as well, just to broaden the question a little bit. One thing I've thought of just in the back of my mind is something like to see if we could, you know, with council's permission, give a discounted rate for anyone renting the community space, like a community room, for a debate or for a meet the candidates type of event. But then we'd have to put some parameters around that. You know, everyone in this ward or everyone in this race has to be invited, those kind of things. So it would be something I would want to research a little bit more, make sure that I'm not doing anything that's offside from, you know, other clerks in the province, but definitely something we could research more for the future.
Any other questions from council? No, seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Smith. There is a recommendation in the report. Is there anybody who would like to move the recommendation? Councillor Grant, do I have a seconder? Councillor Burgess, all in favor? That would be carried. Okay, next in the report, we have the Manager of Development Engineering, Lori Fox, to provide council with an overview of her report. Lori, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Madam Chair and members of council, I'm here this evening to present report DS 41-2022. And it's called Quality Control Measures for Topsoil and New Development. And it's exactly speaking about that. In the past, we've had some correspondence and discussions with former council about the amount of topsoil that's being placed on residential lots, specifically in new development lots, and the amount of topsoil that the contractors and the builders are putting down on the private property side, the yards of the property. And at a recent October 3rd council meeting, former Councillor Shantz had noted that he wanted to make sure that that was something that was taken care of and that staff looked into what we do now as far as making sure that the proper amount of topsoil is placed on residential yards. At that time, the director commented to council that
we were in basically an inspection by complaint enforcement. We just didn't have the staff in the past to inspect every single yard to make sure. And that we were counting on the consultant for the applicant or the developer to make sure that the proper amount of soil is placed. As far as for the township, the requirements for topsoil on private property, it's noted in a few different documents. It's noted in our engineering design manual. It's also noted in the township's landscape and design guidelines. And then thirdly, it's also included in the engineering design drawings that the consultant submits on behalf of the development. So it's really in a few places in the township that requirement is. For the most part, it follows the provincial standards for topsoil for private yards. That's what is in these documents. And then the infrastructure manual is a little more detailed and stringent of a document as far as requirements go. It talks of measurements and amounts and quality of soil to be put on these lots. So when we talk about soil quantity, we really are talking about the depth of topsoil, good quality topsoil that they put beneath before they lay the sod. And we have in the past, we have relied, like I said, on the consultant for the developer or builder to do those inspections, make sure that the topsoil depth is sufficient to support the growth of the sod to help it to catch, right? And along with that, what they do is they drop the homeowner a little leaflet that says you've got new sod, please water in a certain timeline. Then when we talk about quality of topsoil, quality it's like an organic mix. So we're talking about the mix of the topsoil. For development, residential development, what they do is they actually scrape off the top layer of the topsoil before they start construction. They stockpile it on the development site to be reused later. And the quality of that topsoil isn't always pristine for what we would have in our residential lots, sod to be placed on top of it. Was fine for its use when it was, let's say, an agricultural, depending on what they were growing, but it's not always of a good organic mixture. Again, staff had relied on the geotechnical consultant for the developer to analyze that, to make sure that they had a sufficient amount of good topsoil to use in the yards. And again, we were on a complaint basis. If somebody had complained, we would go out and take a look and deal with it at that time. So what staff has done is we looked at the documents that we've got in-house, and also, considering the provincial standards for topsoil and sod placement. And we developed some quality control measures for topsoil that we're going to be bringing more to the forefront with these development agreements, and also for more frequent inspection when it comes to topsoil and sod, and making sure that that topsoil has a good depth, sufficient depth, and sufficient quality. So those I've listed them in the report. Some of them we're going to go through all of our documents and make sure they all align, that they all reference the same topsoil quality and quantity. We're going to also look at our development agreements and make sure that they state information on specifically on lot topsoil in the forefront, and not just refer to the other documents we have in-house. The other thing that happens is when a lot is finished and the topsoil has all been laid, staff go out and do a final inspection of the lot just to make sure that the grading works. There's no areas of ponding, and we do take a look at the topsoil then. So we're going to make sure that the documents that get passed back to us requesting certification, that consultant has said, yes, there is sufficient topsoil down, both in quality and quantity, and that it will sufficiently it will help to grow the sod in the way that it should. we're also going to do a lot more spot checking of the topsoil. So we have more staff now, we have more feet on the ground. We can go to these sites more often and make sure that they are doing the inspections. We can measure the topsoil depth, and we can ask if there's a question, we will ask them to send us the information, and if need be, to test the soil to make sure that the organics in it are proper for sod growth. And then we thought what we'll also do is reach out to homeowners through their developers. So speak with the builder and developer and make sure homeowners are aware of the requirements, what it takes to grow the sod, and making sure they're providing their customer really with that information on proper watering and other techniques to make sure that their topsoil and sod is taken care of. And we'll also work with, of course, the builders and the developers to make sure that they're aware that this is something that's important to us, and that we're going to be doing regular inspections on it. And if need be, if further inspection is needed, there are additional fees now in our fees and charges bylaw that will cover these extra inspections should they not comply with the standards. That's pretty much it.
Thank you, Ms. Fox. Council, are there any questions for Ms. Fox? Your shots.
Thank you, through you to Ms. Fox. Just a question on the reviewing the standards and guidelines. And I know we just recently set those standards and guidelines. So what are you anticipating the nature of the review?
So through the chair, to the mayor, yeah, what we plan on doing is just doing an overall review and making sure that they all coordinate and have and relay the same information, that there's no confusion in it. And a lot of times a way to do that is to have one place that the actual numbers are placed, and then every other document would refer to that. So that's a way of there being no sort of confusion or interpretation in it.
Okay, I just want to ensure that we're not going to reduce it back to what it was. If you're reviewing the standards. So I just want to ensure that the standards that were requested as a higher standard stay there, and that it's not reviewed and looked at the you know, you're comparing to provincial topsoil standards that perhaps are lower. So that's my concern, that it doesn't get lowered.
Sure. So through the chair, we will take a look at that. We thought that we could start with, we know that there is some language in our landscape guidelines. I think that's probably what you're talking about. There's also language in our development manual. And then there's also, like I said, the provincial guidelines too. So if we, for instance, add this information into the engineering development guidelines, to get that, when that update happens, it will have to come to council. So at that time, you will have an opportunity also to see what we're proposing for that number.
Oh. Okay, just the point, the council, the previous council just recently set those guidelines, and we're pretty definite in what they wanted there. So I'm still questioning why we're reviewing them, but. Okay.
Any other questions from council? Councillor Schmidt?
Yes, thanks. Going through the recommendations, most of them made sense to me, especially like increasing spot checks, because looking at topsoil, you understand how much is there. I am concerned that requiring a topsoil quality analysis adds cost, but doesn't have any benefit, because it's pretty easy to get any sample you want with the results you want. But going out, looking at the quality, not the quality, but the depth is the most important thing from the conversations I heard at the previous council. It's make sure there's enough there. So that's what I think we should focus on, as opposed to testing a pound of soil.
Thank you. Councillor Grant?
Just in regards to the random spot checks, I just wanted to ask how often they're done and then what the increase would be. And then a secondary question, which may be foolish, but Basically, how do we decide which sites are getting inspected, or is it just from a hat, random?
Through the chair to the counselor. That's a great question. As you can imagine, we have a wide range of sites and types of development, even within the residential portion of it. And we also have a wide range of contractors and developers and builders that we deal with. And some are really, really good at providing us with the information and making sure that we've seen it. And others, but they just may not have the time, or often when it comes to laying sod, I mean, one day you go and there's nothing and the next day it's all done. So really it's about them letting us know their schedule, and then we will go out to the site. As I mentioned before, there was one person that did all of this for the entire township, which was it's a struggle. So now we have a second person, and that basically you could in your mind think that will double up. And also with us asking for the developer to provide us with this information ahead of time, like to let us know that yes, they have checked it and that they did lay the proper amount of topsoil down, get them to sign off on that. And then when we're out doing our spot checks, you know, you can have some confidence that they said they would.
Any other questions from council? No, seeing none. We have a recommendation in the report. Is there anyone who would like to move the recommendation? Councillor Cadeau, do I have a seconder? Councillor Grant, any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? That would be carried. Thank you, Ms. Fox. Next on the agenda is Bill 23, more homes to be built faster. Before we get Mr. Vink going on this, I have one question for Jeremy. In his recommendation, there's the second whereas he says, if the legislation, if passed, but the legislation has been passed. So does he want to amend this recommendation before we start? Or I'll leave that.
Yeah, we can do that, and then we'll kind of touch back on that maybe at the end of my presentation to remind council to make that change. As council is probably aware, Bill 23 got passed by the province last week after staff had put the report onto the agenda. So it's just the way the province is working with us. So yes, we would look to amend that piece, that whereas, and say that whereas Bill 23 is a significant piece of legislation that will have high consequential land use, will be highly consequential to land use planning in the township of Woolwich. So just take out would if passed and change it to will.
Will be highly, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you can go ahead then.
Yeah.
Okay.
So thank you. So bit of history for council, as you started in the background. Bill 109 was approved by the province earlier this year. Staff did take a report to council, the previous council, at the end of October, because we had to start implementing some changes to be ready for Bill 109, which starts January 1st, 2023. So Bill 109, we did take a number of report to council on that previously. Bill 23 is building on Bill 109 and the province's goal to build more homes faster. So Bill 23 was proposed in the 25th of October. The commenting period goes to December the 9th, but in the interim count, the province has already passed the legislation as it applies to most of these items in front of us tonight. So we wanted to get in front of you still before the December 9th deadline ends so that council could provide comments to the province. Even though they have moved forward, but this was our only opportunity to do it given the new council and the timing. So Bill 23 looked at amending the Planning Act, Development Charges Act, Conservation Authorities Act, and the whole list is there. There's like 12 of them or more in total. We're going to touch on the ones that mainly affect the township of Woolwich. So specifically, we're going to start with the Planning Act. There's some proposed changes in the Planning Act. First of all, to allow 3 units per property on a residential lot. Also to allow as of right densities around transit areas, planning policy and approval responsibilities are changing, where they're going to remove the upper tier municipalities with their planning approvals in that term, in terms of planning approvals. Future regulations will have to come out about what does require minister approval in terms of official plan amendments, with the regions out of the picture in that term. Limits on third-party appeals to planning matters. So that was proposed at the time also. Changes for no public meetings for draft plans of subdivision, so they're not required anymore. Changes to site plan requirements for units for 10 units or less. And then limitations on what we can require in terms of exterior facade designs. Some other changes, specifically some big changes around parkland dedication, and there's a whole list of those. There's a bunch of them there that's changing how parkland can be calculated and what can be provided in terms of parkland dedication to the municipalities, now giving a lot more flexibility to the developers to what they give and a little less of it. Essentially, what are the impacts to the township? All of the planning approvals are basically going to be moving down to the local level, which is the township, because the region, the province is proposing that the region will no longer have planning approval authority. So they will not be giving us, they won't be the approval authority for plans of subdivision, or they won't have a regional official plan in the future, that kind of thing. So everything will move down to the local level. So the concern here is obviously the region level gives us that full comprehensive look at the region to look at these big picture items, things like the projected land needs assessment and splitting that between the municipalities, cross-border servicing issues, comprehensive look at how to protect the agricultural land, protection of natural heritage features across the region in general and how that looks. So the region always played that role and put that information into their regional official plan. We're now no longer going to have that. So the concern here is that we're going to lose that overall comprehensive approach and done consistently across the municipalities. That's going to make it very more disjointed. So each municipality will have their own official plan and can start to move their own different directions a little bit. So there won't be that consistency in the region. For things that do need to be coordinated, it'll be much more work to coordinate between the municipalities to be in agreement to move forward in each of our individual plans to match them up. So as you can see, there is some concerns here that we will lose that overall coordinated approach that we'd like to see. One of the changes with the site plan process, as I mentioned, is we're going to lose that approval ability to look at 10 units or less. So there is some questions how that will work and what that will look like, and whether there'll be implications for grading and drainage and stormwater and snow storage and just how those sites will function, but we no longer have approval authorities for that. One of the things that was often our previous council's concern was also how buildings looked in facades. So we're now going to lose that opportunity to require facade review during a site plan review. As mentioned, one of the things that is lost also is the requirement for a public meeting for a plan of subdivision. So it's not required, it doesn't prohibit us from having one. It's just saying that we aren't required to have one. And that would mean if we didn't, the public would lose that right to comment to it through that process. One of the elements that was proposed as part of the changes too for the public was that third-party appeal process. Originally, it was proposed that all third-party appeals would be removed. The way the act has been changed at this point is just minor variances and consents will no longer be permitted to be appealed by third parties. Zone changes and official plan amendments still remain as an opportunity for the public to appeal. So that's already a big change in and of itself that we've seen. So, and then the big changes around the parkland dedication is types of lands that we can get and then the amount of land. And if we're not acquiring as much land as we used to, but we're building at greater densities, the question is going to be whether we'll have enough sufficient parkland in our new subdivisions to support the community. And if we don't, we'd have to acquire the lands by paying for them or acquiring them in a different way, which is going to cost the taxpayer. Moving forward to the Development Charges Act, there's a number of changes in the Development Charges Act about the way how development charges are calculated, which properties we can acquire development charges. So there is exemptions for affordable housing units and some low income units. There is a change of how we have to spend the money that we acquire through the development charges also. So there's significant big changes, and we're going to touch on those a little bit further on the report in the financial section. But major changes of how we get to calculate what we can accumulate, which means there's less money coming in through development charges. So to pay for some of these development related projects that are going to take place, is we're going to have to come up with the funding somewhere else. And that's going to mean coming off the taxpayers of the rest of the municipality, not development paying for itself. In terms of the Conservation Authorities Act, that is also being changed. Conservation authorities' role will be limited to commenting and planning applications to risks of natural hazard and nothing else. And they're also restricting them in terms of what they can collect for fees. So that's going to change how we get dialogue with the conservation authorities and planning applications. We are no longer going to have their expertise to look at, say, master drainage plans, larger natural heritage features, environmental impact studies. So we're going to have to now do peer reviews to hire experts potentially to review those studies that are still going to need to be done and completed within the required timelines. So there's going to be costs and implications there. Hopefully, we usually do this on the developer because we require them to pay the peer review deposit, but we are going to lose them in terms of helping us with the big picture review. Changes to the Ontario Heritage Act. So there are some changes there also. They've kind of tightened some timelines up, requiring that we move forward with either designating a property if it's listed, just not letting it sit on our listed list forever, giving some additional timelines about how long before a property can be torn down if they do wish to move forward, etc. So there's a few changes there. It's just going to make things a little bit harder on the heritage side, but all in all, it's probably not the worst one of all the three applications, but it is some changes that we'll have to deal with. The Ontario Land Tribunal Act is being changed. That's where we're talking about the eliminating the third-party appeals, for example, which I already mentioned is going to be limited to consents and minor variances as has been passed by the province already. There is greater flexibility to award costs and the ability for the tribunal to kind of prioritize things a little faster to keep things moving through the process. This bill and these changes are obviously impacting substantially the development planning staff significantly, but it is also impacting financial services, infrastructure, and recreational services in regards to the development charges. And this is where we look at those financial impacts, where I would suggest maybe our Director of Finance can give you much better answers, because he put this together and has the information in front of you. But substantially, what we have in front of us today, what we're collecting for development charges, isn't really paying for the growth as it is. The funds we have in our reserves right now for development charges are not enough to complete some of the projects, and we're going to even have less in the future. So what it means is we don't have these massive reserves for fun. They're there to cover off these big picture projects we know we're going to need and to pay for them. But there isn't enough there to pay for those that we have in place. And this means we're going to have to raise money off the general levy or another method to pay for these costs that we're trying to collect for development charges. So there are some of the numbers are provided in the report here. You know, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars to millions of dollars here in impacts to our financial and to our municipality. So as a result, in front of you, you do have the recommendation as proposed to be amended, because the Bill 23 was passed last week. We're hoping that council will move forward to support this, along with the other many municipalities across the province who have raised concerns with the process of Bill 23 and its impacts. Open for questions, and as noted, I think Director of Finance Richard Petherick's also here to answer questions on the financial side.
Thank you, Mr. Vink. Council, are there any questions for Mr. Vink? Councillor Cadeau.
Thank you. I'm just trying to figure out where the information was that I wanted to ask. Okay, through you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering, in the changes that they've suggested, or I guess that have been legislated now, it's indicating, excuse me, that a certain percentage has to be allocated to be spent, and I'm talking about the DC charges. I'm just wondering if you can say what our current DC charges as far as allocation would be extending out, say 5 years from now. What would that be? Are we going to meet the standards as set in this legislation? Does that make sense?
Mr. Patrick?
Yeah, to you, Madam Chair. So I think I would say if you look at the attachment to it, basically says we would be allocating 60% and then some. We wouldn't have enough development charges. I think from what we even anticipate coming in from a revenue perspective, what we currently anticipate we're going to have at the end of this year, and then what we're actually going to need even over the next 5 years. We're looking at it that we're going to be needing to borrow a significant amount of millions of dollars to be able to fund everything. So we'd be well past 60%.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up to that, I am just looking at the document that you're referencing, and it's, into 2023, the balance is showing net negative in what we're looking at there. And once we go into 2024, it's fully been used up, any reserves that we would have in the DC fund. I'm just trying to get a sense of that. Can you just confirm that that's correct?
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor. So the way the chart reads is, you're right. In 2023, we'd be looking at needing to borrow $4.3 million. If we were to look at, and this is based on the 2022 capital budget. So obviously, things are going to have to change as we get into the 2023 year budget year. But based on the 2022 capital plan, as of next year, we'd be looking at borrowing $4.3 million, and then another almost $4 million in 2024, and then another $1.2 million in 2025. So that's what we'd really essentially be looking at over the next 5 years.
Councillor Schmidt, you had a question?
Just following up on Councillor Cadeau's point, the capital budget is going to be underspent this year. So can we also assume that the forecasted DC expenses, capital expenses, will be underspent in 23 as well? And can you give us an idea of the order of magnitude?
So through you, Madam Mayor, if I catch your question correctly, Councillor Swint, you're looking at, since we're pretty much through 2022, what we anticipate to be spending in DCs in 2022. Yeah. Okay. Do we anticipate that we're going to be spending all of that? No, I don't. So I do believe there is going to be some carryover. However, I think the totality, even from what we're looking at from 2023, we're still within that like $8 to $9 million from a debt perspective. Yeah, that's, I did look at it from, and I wanted to present to council, this is what actually has been approved. But as we have been developing our 2023 budget to 2027, we can still see some significant DC debt needs.
Does council have any other questions? Mayor Shantz? Doesn't want to work.
Through you to Richard. We're going to be doing a DC charge review this year coming up, correct? What usually happens in that review? Does it usually go up or down, the requirements?
There we go. Through you, Madam Mayor. So, excuse me, through you, Madam Chair, to Madam Mayor. Yes, so we're in the process of doing a DC update. I would say that under the old requirements, we'd be looking at starting our next full up, or no, I guess I would say the full background study, which would have been due in July of 2024. But with this, it doesn't look like that's necessarily going to be the case, but we are still looking at an update because we have some significant projects that are going to be coming forward. I think one of the ones that we looked at from the previous council was the Brazil Collector Road. So there are a couple of other things that are coming forward. So we would be collecting these or including these as updates, when that would actually drive the charge up. And I would say typically what would happen is obviously DCs do go up. And I think right now, one of the big crux is the fact that construction prices are going up. So that's actually going to be driving our DC cost up as well. From the perspective, I would say that, we've had situations where a rate has decreased and we said, if it needs to decrease, it will decrease, but when it needs to increase, it will increase. But definitely through the update, you're going to be seeing some cost increases. I think the challenge that we're going to be looking at is whether this 5-year phase-in then applies to that as well. I think there will be a number of things that we're going to be trying to seek some legal opinions and some expert opinions out in the market to try to say, how does this really shape out? How does this really play out for us from a financial end of things?
Okay, just one other question that I'm trying to work through in my mind is when the government talks about these charges that we're not going to be able to collect as only for affordable housing. Can someone speak to that piece of it? Because I'm not quite, that's not what I'm getting from what I hear from the region and from our staff.
Yeah, so I'll try to do my best on this one. So through Madam Chair, they're talking about the exemptions. So these are the properties that will not be paying DCs at all. So you're right. So that would be the affordable housing, some of the rental housing, some of those would be exempt from DCs. But I think really some of the financial pictures that we, along with, I would assume the finance staff of the region, what they're trying to say is there's also other changes, like such as the phase in, such as the way they're saying you need to do your calculations for your background studies. They used to have like a 10-year historical level of service. Now they're shifting that out to 15 years, which is, really at times can be very detrimental, especially to a growing municipality like ourselves. We are nowhere close to our service levels, like let alone 10 years ago than we were 15 years ago. So there's other financial impacts that we're going to be experiencing other than this, than I guess the exemptions, but I think for this council's benefit, we already have within our existing development charges bylaw, the exemption for social housing or affordable housing.
Thank you. That was going to be my next question.
Any other questions from council? Councillor Grant?
I just had some questions in regard to the attached report on Bill 109 on site plans specifically. So we mentioned that we'd be tracking plan conditions and approval prior to allowing development. I just wanted to ask what the process would look like and how we would accomplish tracking and follow up.
Is that for Mr. Vink? Or
I think Mr. Vink, yeah.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Grant. So once we have an application that's deemed complete for a site plan, we're going to obviously have a time frame we have to work within it. So we'll initiate that, know that this is the start date and this is the last date for us to get it completed. So in that time period, we're going to circulate agencies. We'll have to set that deadline in between that we circulate the agencies to get some comment and feedback to determine what issues they might have. Essentially, we're going to craft a conditional site plan agreement in that time period. Once we get those comments from those agencies, we'll craft that conditional site plan agreement to say, yes, we support the site plan so long as it conforms to basically zoning, meaning setbacks, parking, those kind of things. And in the conditional site plan approval, there'll be steps for them to follow through. So we'll say before building permit, you'll need to complete these items, whatever they might be, maybe a road widening, grading and drainage plans, lighting plans, landscaping plans, etc. They would all have to be completed before building permit. So if they apply for a building permit, then we would go through and double check that agreement to make sure each of those is checked off accordingly. Then they can move on to the building permit stage. There'll be other clauses in the agreement that says once you've started, you'll now have to complete and provide us letters of credit for certain things, maybe on road works or landscaping, and they have to request those funds back from us. And there'll be other clauses in the agreement that may stipulate certain items to us that have to be completed, and they'd be requesting returns or clarifying, giving us documentation to that effect. And we'll have to follow up after about a year to make sure that they've moved forward. So we're looking at a year timeline that from when they get approval to them to start moving on the building permit at least. But it is going to be more work on staff actually following through a bit of a tracking process using the conditional site plan agreement.
Okay. And then just as part of that, when an applicant withdraws a request, would this mean the applicant would then start anew on that timeline, or would it just put a pause?
So definitely a great question. So as soon as the applicant withdraws something, it is actually withdrawn and they'd have to reapply to go back to the process if they did decide to do that. So it wouldn't be typical for someone to withdraw a site plan once they've started at that point. If they've done a complete, they probably would have started, they would have decided before they made the complete application in the pre-application process. So there's a lot of discussion prior to them actually submitting formally.
Okay, perfect. And then I just have one more.
Go ahead.
When it comes to the pre-approved firms, we'd be reviewing that list regularly on a yearly basis to judge whether or not a firm should remain on that list or add new firms.
And yes, thank you, Madam Councillor Bryant to Councillor Grant. So we were just talking about this the other week internally between finance and infrastructure, so we could craft this process and determine how we go about it. So we are going to be looking for expressions of interest from various firms and put it out initially and seek them. It doesn't prohibit somebody from coming in regularly. So we probably be reviewing the list at least yearly, that we could add firms as necessary. It would be for a 5-year time period, we're thinking, that they'd initially start. So there would be a 5-year process. We say this is for the first 5 years so that they understand there's an opportunity and it makes it worthwhile for them. It's not just a year. So they would be for 5 years. And then as every year we'd be at least once renewing and adding people if they desire to be added, or they can withdraw for whatever reason. Let's say they lose the skill sets, they lose their engineering expertise or whatever, they could withdraw also, but yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Council, any other questions? Councillor Smith?
Yeah, I've got a couple actually. So the DC bylaw sets out for moving from 5 years to 10 years. Is it 10 years a maximum or a minimum?
To you, Madam Chairman, I would say that is the maximum. Because there's nothing prohibiting you, and my understanding, there's nothing prohibiting you from actually opening up your DC bylaw again.
Okay, so in that effect, it wouldn't have a whole lot of change in this council if we just chose to look at every 5 years.
That's true. I think what would happen though is that, you know, I think it's something we could look at, because again, there is that 5-year phase in of new DCs. So I think that's probably the analysis that would have to occur, is to say, if we're going to open up the bylaw, would we be opening it up? Because now you're going to be back into the potential appeal period where, you know, anybody can come in and say, I don't agree with something that is in your background study. And then whether that makes financial sense. But you're right. I haven't heard anything that says, hey, every 5 years we're still going to open it up and redo it again. I haven't heard something that says we can't.
And I missed this earlier when Councillor Cadeau was looking at the debt required of $9.5 million in 4 or 5 years. If the Breslaw, I'm gonna call it bridge, for lack of a better term, was approved at 25 million, would that mean we're at almost 35 million in shortfall?
To you, Madam Chairman, at this stage of the game, yeah, I think you'd be definitely looking at, you know, based on the fact that already that cost is not included in our current DC, which is why we're going through the update. But if we were to be looking at doing it like the next year, yeah, you'd be adding another $25 to $30 million.
I want to make sure I understood that properly. So I want to ask a philosophical question of council, I guess. This report was pretty detailed on how we can accomplish the current planning process under new timelines and regulations. I think the intent from the province has been to try and streamline, reduce costs, and reduce the intensity of the planning process. Has staff considered areas they could prioritize or in inverse de-emphasize in the planning process to reduce costs and make it easier to achieve while still meeting our key objectives?
Mr. Vink?
Yes, wasn't sure if it was a philosophical question to the councillor or I was supposed to respond, but sorry, it threw me off. But interesting question. Elements we can de-emphasize. I guess Bill 109 gave us timelines to deal with planning applications, and we're still bound by the Planning Act, right? So the Planning Act still gives us regulations and how we have to process something and what we need to look at. And we have policies in place in our official plan, and as well as provincial policies we have to consider. So those are all almost that tie together when you're looking at a planning application. So you can't de-emphasize elements that you're required to look at through the planning process, whether it's because of the Planning Act or through those provincial policies. So, and we only have that timeline to work within. So it doesn't give us much flexibility, to be honest. What it is doing with the changes with Bill 23 is actually putting more pressure on township staff, because we won't have the region reviewing certain elements they used to do, for example, or the Conservation Authority for some of their expertise. So what it's going to mean is using those peer reviewers to do some of the work for us, where we don't have those expertise. But internally, we're going to have to rely as much as we can on our own expertise to keep the costs down and to review the applications appropriately, making sure they are looking at everything they need to look at that are in those policies. So it's not an easy thing that we could de-emphasize anything anywhere and say, let's not look at this or not worry about that. No, we can't really. We still have to follow those policies and work with them and make sure everything's covered off. Because if we don't, and we end up in front of the Ontario Land Tribunal, then we will lose because we're not properly assessing our applications in front of us and giving council a good recommendation of how to proceed. So we have to be very cautious about how we do our jobs here and make sure we review them properly.
Brenneman?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Schwint. I think the area that we continue to focus in on, and we had a lot of discussion as part of Bill 109, is how do we make sure that we streamline the process enough where in the past we've had feedback from the development community. Can we get some clarity, about what the requirements are, so there's not a lot of back and forth. So when you talk about efficiency and streamlining, I'd like to see in the future, the elimination of the back and forth that happens a lot because of at times confusion over maybe what our requirements are, or for that matter, often it's on the other side in terms of their consultants aren't getting back to us as quickly. Often the blame is put on us, but I've seen lots of examples of where we've been able to demonstrate where the developers planning consultants or the developers engineering consultants have not actually responded to us in a timely fashion. So it's a two-way street when it comes to streamlining and efficiency. And if we're going to move the dial to, the ultimate goal is to get more housing built as quickly as possible, then it's going to have to be a mutual collaboration on both sides to streamline the parties that are involved in the overall development approval process. But outside of that, my other concern, and I think Jeremy was touching upon this, is we need to be careful because with speed, we don't want to get into situations that we run into development issues down the road. That's one of the concerns that we have. Within the township of Woolwich, we've seen examples in past history as well, not just with speed, but if you have insufficient staffing resources to throughout history say properly inspect what's going in the ground or the infrastructure, what does that mean in terms of what the general taxpayer has to pay 10, 15 or 20 years down the road when something needs to be replaced sooner than it should have been? So that's another concern I think we need to acknowledge with respect to Bill 109 and Bill 23. Yes, we definitely need to deal with the housing crisis, but let's be careful that our interest in becoming more efficient isn't all driven by speed alone, because speed can ultimately run into costly long-term impacts for the general taxpayer.
Mayor Shantz? They don't like you tonight.
I have this thing with equipment. It doesn't like me at all. Thank you. I'm talking too much, maybe. I don't know. So my question is sort of related to what Mr. Brenneman just talked about, and that is, not assuming that you've had time to really wrap your mind around all these little nuances, but we will require more staffing then to process the information that's coming in. We're growing rapidly. Has there been any thought to what some of those costs might be?
Mr. Brenneman?
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, to Mayor Shantz. Yeah, I mean, that's certainly something that, I can say will be addressed as part of the budget process and our staffing or our budget report regarding, whenever we're impacted by provincial decisions, and I think I mentioned this a little bit through the orientation process, is that it's our job to look at what the impact of that change in legislation and regulation is going to be, and how do we actually reasonably comply. However, as part of anything, we look at the full gamut. Mr. Vink talked about the fact that, what will be able to be accomplished either with in-house resources, additional staffing, or contracted resources like peer review, things of that nature. So our job is not just to naturally go with one particular element. It's how can we reasonably accomplish things, because ultimately we're looking at the bottom line with respect to the budget.
Mayor Shantz?
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is even the peer reviews are going to cost the township additional funds, and where will those funds ultimately come from?
Well, I think Mr. Vink covered off the fact that historically we've been able to get to the developers to cover off the responsibility for that. And as long as the province doesn't pass any legislation that would prevent us from doing so, I think, we'll certainly try to continue along that stream. The developers and builders, my experience, in the planning and development world has been, they are willing to pay for the peer review costs if it means things are going to move in a timely and efficient fashion. But recognize, even though they're paying for the peer reviews are coming to us because, ultimately it's not the payer, it's us as a municipality that needs to make sure that things are reviewed in accordance with our standards and our regulations.
Any other questions from council? No, seeing none. We have before you a amended recommendation in the report. Is anybody willing to move the recommendation? Mayor Shantz?
Just there was one other, I guess the very first number one, the request the government of Ontario defer the review of Bill 23. We could just take that out, yeah.
Right, remove section 1. Oh, number 2 as well, remove both of them. Oh, keep number 2, just get rid of number 1. So that would be, okay, number 1 in turn.
And I would just change number 2 to send a copy of this report, or, yeah.
Yeah, direct staff to send a copy of this resolution and staff report to the Premier of Ontario.
Do we leave the, sure, okay.
That one's okay with you? Okay. Is everybody okay with that amendment? Then we'll call the question. Sorry.
So, Madam Chair, can we have some discussion on this one?
Sure.
I'm struggling a little bit in our actions. This staff report's very thorough, well done. But to send it off to the province, fortunately, we're not writing it on paper because we'd be killing a tree that I don't think is worthwhile. But I do think that we can take this report and do some really good lobby work with it. To me, that means focusing our concerns in 2 or 3 areas. It means fleshing out Mr. Petherick's report on the financial report and requesting a meeting with our MPP, asking how he can help us access funds to offset these DC costs. Those are short items that attract attention, and you can have a discussion about. Long report that's less thorough. Unfortunately, bureaucrats at Queen's Park will fall asleep reading it. But I think there's some really important stuff here that we could lobby that could make a difference if we do it effectively. I'm curious if we could modify the recommendation on how we present the information.
So what do you want to modify the recommendation to read? Or how do we proceed with this, I guess, is my question. Clerk Smith, any suggestions?
Sorry, my video is just coming on. There we go.
Oh, sorry.
So through you, Madam Chair, what we could do is we could take amendments from the floor. If council wants to do that, we could make any changes that you think are appropriate, debate and discuss, and then pass it if it's council's will. The other thing you could do is you could ask staff to go back and amend something if there's something more technical or more thought that has to go into it. And then, I mean, even Mr. Vink is here tonight, so he can comment on the floor tonight if you want to do that. He may just not feel confident if you get into many changes. He may want to take it back and think about it a little bit.
Okay, I'm going to open this up to council, then it's your decision to make. So what would you like to do with this recommendation? Mayor Shantz?
Yeah, I could let council know that I did let MPP Harris know that this report is public and sent him a copy. And that we'd be discussing it tonight. So if you're asking for me to do a follow-up meeting with him, I could certainly do that, and you could direct me through this motion if you wanted to do that.
Councillor Schwint?
To my mind, a follow-up meeting with MPP Harris should focus on the finances. That's what he's brought up and tried to use politically. Let's keep it short and sweet, because my experience meeting with him is a 1 or 2 page document. Is much more effective than the nuances of the Planning Act. And if we can show a $35 million deficit in our DC fund, ask him for help in that, as opposed to complain about the new law. To me, that's more effective.
I agree.
Okay.
Did you want that included? Something to the effect of meeting with MPP Harris? Do you want that part of the recommendation, or just want me to do either way?
Either way, I'm ambivalent how we direct it, as long as we focus the message we're giving MPP Harris.
So just add that section about MPP Harris. Is that what you want to do with this?
That addresses the financial part of it.
Right. And what's the other part? How did you?
I'm sorry if I can interject here just for a moment. I'm wondering if we can add a whereas recent conversations in the provincial legislature in referencing Woolwich's financial situation with respect to DC charges. I mean, we just wanted to provide some clarity around that, I think is kind of what the goal is, and correct me if I'm wrong.
That's my goal on the financial part for sure. But on the planning side of things, I think it'd be worthwhile to have a condensed letter stating our key concerns on the Planning Act, how difficult it is to meet the timelines, and the fact that we're losing the region's assistance on their ROP and the GRCA feedback. A 1-pager on that, asking for the minister to reply. How do you expect us to handle this? That puts a bit of pressure for responses.
Sorry, Mr. Brenneman.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair, may I suggest this? From my experience, whereas clauses are they're just more background. Your intent will be what you approve in terms of the actual final part of that motion. And so if I'm grasping what Councillor Schwint is trying to get consensus or majority support from council on, is that instead of, so we've already taken recommendation or section 1 out. I think he's suggesting that section 2 be amended to say that staff be directed to prepare a summary briefing to be able to provide to our MPP and the provincial government regarding our in a summary way, our concerns with respect to the planning elements, and that more specifically, we request a meeting regarding financial support to make us whole regarding the capital monies that we're going to need long-term. I mean, that needs to be massaged, but is that generally, is that from my experience, you want us to make a short and sweet briefing document on the planning elements that just provide an executive summary of the planning concerns. But ultimately, the main request for the meeting would be to outline our concerns with how we get support from the province, no different than what we've seen in the news, you know, with Mayor Tory from Toronto being told they will be supported in a financial way, that be the main focus of the meeting. So executive briefing, but the main request is for a meeting with an MPP to get support for assisting us with our long-term capital needs with respect to growth-related infrastructure. Does that meet your intent, Councillor Schwinn?
Yep. Just pick the people to request those conversations with. Sorry. And then let's pick the appropriate people to have those meetings with. The minister, our local MPP, make it a critic involved, whoever makes sense to staff and Mayor Shantz.
And so I guess in these situations, it's a great learning and growth opportunity for council. My normal thing is, if council is supportive by consensus with that direction, then that's the motion that you would vote on. If you're not supportive of that, then that's when you can have further debate and discussion. But in order for staff to act on this, you'll have to support that in the way of a motion.
Nobody's moving. So does everybody get the gist of what was just said here? Everybody's okay? They understand? Okay, what a mover for that, and then we can have further discussion. Councillor Schwint, do I have a seconder? Councillor Cadeau, any further discussion? I keep wanting to call you Nadeau. I don't know why. We have any further discussion on this? Seeing none, I'll call the question then. All in favor? That would be carried. Okay, then we can move forward and put that one in play. Then we move on to other business, council reports and updates. Do we have any? None? Sorry. Clerk Smith.
I think Mayor Shantz wanted to bring forward an item regarding a request from West Montrose.
You're correct. I'm sorry. I missed that one.
Hey, thank you. The last item was so exciting. I almost forgot. So traditionally, the West Montrose bridge keepers have done a carol sing on the West Montrose Bridge. And there's been a $200 fee to close the bridge, and they last council waived that fee for the term of council. So they are asking to have that fee waived for 2022 to 2026, and I believe they're caroling tonight. So
they are.
So can I make a motion that we waive the $200 fee to close the West Montrose Bridge from 2022 to 2026 term of council? I actually have a better wording than that, but I can't find it right now. Clerk Smith, did I do a pretty good job of it? Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to ask for a mover for that motion.
I just moved it.
You moved it. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Grant, any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? And that would be carried. Okay, then we move on to any discussion on the outstanding activity list. None? Nobody has anything with that one? Notice of motions, we have none. Then that brings us to adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Nobody wants to go home tonight? Councillor Grant? Seconder, Councillor Burgess. That would be everybody. All of those in favor? That would be carried. In closing, council would like to thank all who participated or tuned into the meeting tonight. Council, please stay connected or on Zoom until the live stream has stopped. Good night, everyone.